Everyone. I'm Aaron Maslansky, and I'm honored to be here today to interview Eli Adler, who is a filmmaker and made the movie Surviving Skokie. My connection to the JCC is long. I went to Apache Day Camp. I sent my children there as well, and to the JCC Early Childhood. It's a wonderful, wonderful organization. And I host a podcast called Inside the Skev, where I profile people in Skokie and Evanston. And it's part of what I do as a real estate agent in the area, where I focus most of my business. But it's been a tremendous passion project for me to really get to know the people and organizations that are in Skokie and Evanston. And to have the opportunity to speak with Ellie about this movie, Surviving Skokie, really hits home to me. I grew up in Skokie. I live in Skokie now. I was born a few years after everything happened that's discussed in the film with the neo-Nazi march, but it greatly affects everything about this community. And I learned so much from this movie, and I really appreciate you being here today to come and talk about Surviving Skokie.
I'm delighted to be here, Aaron. Nice to meet you all, and thank you for all participating in this discussion.
Yeah. So you made this movie, and really, I know you're a filmmaker. You've been a filmmaker for many years, but this is a very personal film. And what gave you the inspiration to make something like this?
Well, actually, this is the first film that I ever produced. I'm primarily a camera person, and I've worked on many other people's documentaries over the years. And one day I decided that I wanted to make my own film. The children were out of college. It seemed like the time was right. And then I got an email from a friend of mine that announced the opening of the Illinois Holocaust Museum. And I started doing research on that. And I met Howard Reich through his article from the Chicago Tribune called Memories of Skokie That Was. And it just resonated with me. And I said, I think I found my project. And I started doing research. And, before I was able to raise any funding, being a cameraman, I own my own equipment. And I bought an airline ticket and I came to Skokie, and I interviewed many people who are actually no longer with us, including Aaron and Harvey and Ted Rashko. And I knew that they were getting older. I knew it was time to at least get their interviews on tape. And then it took another 5 years to raise the funds to complete the film. And we released it in 2015, 5 years ago.
You talk about making sure to record their memory. I mean, in many ways, this movie is a way to tell the story of the Holocaust and the survivors to the next generations, right?
Absolutely. My father just turned 92. He lives in Denver, and he did 5 March of the Livings with BJE, and he just couldn't do it anymore. He's just getting a little too tired and fatigued, and the film is one way to commemorate his story as well as the hundreds of thousands of other stories. His story is unique, but there are many similar stories to his, and I wanted to put it on film.
Well, I think it's important to have different mediums that we have. You've made this wonderful film. I think the Holocaust Museum, what they've done with the hologram exhibit is amazing. And I've gone there several times. I'm actually on the Young Professional board. And it's a wonderful organization too. And I think it's important to be able to pass on this knowledge. And what must be frustrating for survivors is to see that we still have these genocides that take place around the world, and we need to create more upstanders. And but what's incredibly frustrating, what must have been for them, was to see these neo-Nazis who wanted to march in Skokie. And I think it really created a lot of the character of Skokie, and it broke through the silence that survivors had about talking about it and their post-traumatic stress disorder that they were dealing with. So almost in a way, it was the catalyst. I mean, do you view Skokie in that lens?
Absolutely. I don't think the Illinois Holocaust Museum would be there if it weren't for the events that occurred in Skokie in the late 70s. You know, that was certainly the catalyst for the early museum that was on Main Street that,
Hmm.
you know, quickly burst at the seams and inspired what you now have in Skokie, which is a true treasure.
It really is. And, you know, when I've talked to people about it, or Susan Abrams, you know, in particular, did it need to be in Skokie to have that Holocaust Museum there? Because it is a tremendous, you know, a tremendous building and exhibit. But it would almost seem wrong to have it like in downtown Chicago.
I totally agree.
Yeah. You know, so you grew up in Skokie, then you moved to Wilmette. But when all this happened, you know, did you go and protest? And were there? I mean, did you really feel that anger?
Unfortunately, I was in college at that time and I was living in Colorado. So I just followed it from afar by news stories. You know, and certainly felt the anger that a lot of the residents felt, but I wasn't there at the time.
Yeah. But did you speak with your father about it, or I mean, had he already opened up to you at that point about being a survivor?
No, my father at that point had not opened up about that. It really wasn't until he became a grandfather that he started sharing his stories with me. You know, we knew very, very little about his past, only that he was a war orphan, you know, that we had a large family, but they all perished in the Holocaust. But it really wasn't until little later on, like 1984 was when I had my first child. And that's when he started opening up. And that's close to about the time where he started speaking about his experiences to schools throughout the country, really.
Do you think that people were embarrassed about what they went through, or just so sad about it that they just couldn't talk about it? Because it's just such a common theme.
Yeah, I personally, you know, I believe in my father's case that he didn't want to burden us with his past. You know, it was too painful for him, A, to relive, and B, you know, he was in this new country, this free country, and he wanted his children to grow up differently than he did.
Yeah. Did you, though, after learning about this and everything, do you find that it's almost like second generation that you've had to deal with some of these feelings? And was doing the film a way for you to cope with it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Aaron. I absolutely do think that you know, second generation have issues of their own, and you know, and there are studies that show that DNA can be trans can be changed, transformed due to traumatic events. And I think that my father's DNA transformed and carried into me, and there's a certain part of me that feels a very strong connection to the Holocaust and stories like my father's, and the need
Yes.
to, you know, try to educate people and heighten awareness.
And especially doing a project like this, you immerse yourself in it. What was it like talking to the different people that you had on film? And did you, I mean, was it hard to get them to speak with you? Was it, were they happy to do it?
Most were happy. My most reluctant interviewee was Fritzi Fritzoff, who I contacted through the Holocaust Museum, and she agreed to be interviewed. And I set up a little room at the DoubleTree Hotel in Skokie, where I was doing interviews at that time. That was the very first round of interviews, and she arrived, and she wanted to go home. She didn't want to do it. She changed her mind, but somehow I was able to convince her to come in. And I think you know, her particular interview in the film is one of the more powerful ones. I mean, she just speaks from her heart, and I'm so glad that I was able to convince her to be part of the film.
Yeah, no, it's, I think it was important. It was important to show the different people who were, survivors, or even the psychologist, I think, to talk about his experience with working with survivors, and people who've been involved with the JDL, and fighting back and seeing from their experience what it's been like. That was very interesting to me. I mean, but when you look at the story, you look at like Frank Poland, the guy who was the neo-Nazi, who happened to be a son of a survivor, which is just so messed up. Did you try to reach out to him to get him on film?
I did try to reach out to Frank Collin. He after that whole experience, he changed his name and moved to Wisconsin. His name is now Frank Joseph, and he still rants the same, neo-Nazi thoughts in some writings that he does. And I was able to track him down. And at first I didn't tell him who I was. I said, we've been following you. We'd like to do an interview with you. And he said, "Oh, what's it all about?" And I told him what it's about. And he goes, "Oh, my wife and I, our health isn't very good." He's a guy that just loves the spotlight. And, but he didn't want to relive this story. So I don't think the film lacks anything from not having him in it. In fact, it's probably a better film without him in it, but we did try to reach out to him.
Yeah, I can understand that, but it is almost better because he's just so repudiating that it almost makes it even harder if you had to watch him speak
Right.
today and explain himself. And on top of that, he's a child molester.
Right.
Which is, he's just the worst of humanity. But it's interesting though to be able to speak to all these different people and the reactions as you go through back to Poland. And I mean, those must be some of the most intimate moments of your life to walk through there with your father. How do you feel about that being captured on film? I mean, that was when you weren't in the movie except for those parts.
Yeah, you're right, Aaron. That being there with my dad was probably the most meaningful part of my relationship with my father. To hear these stories about the family that I never got to meet really took on a whole new life once we got to Pabianica, his hometown, and I was able to get into the apartment that he grew up in and go to the building where his family was kept in the Pabianica ghetto, and go to the train station outside of Lodz where his family was transported to Auschwitz. I mean, it's hard to really put into words how meaningful that experience was for me. And for me to be able to share that, now I'm a grandfather, he's a great grandfather, to share that family legacy is, it's the best feeling that I have.
It's almost like you had a prism of what his life was, and you've been able to shine a spotlight through on that.
Yeah. I mean, we interviewed him, I think 6 times for the film. You may notice that the backgrounds are different for many of the interviews. And every time we interviewed him, a new story came out. It was like peeling the layers of an onion. Not that he didn't remember, but I know he repressed a lot of his memories, and certain questions would trigger a new memory to come out. And I think if we interviewed him another 5 or 6 times, we'd even get more stories.
Yeah.
But
did what was his reaction when that man came up to you guys and basically told you that you couldn't record?
He was trying to downplay it. I think I reacted a little more negatively than he did. He was not happy that we were told to leave. I mean, I was just building up emotionally, hearing all these stories and being in the place that he was, that he lived. And for that man to come up to us and tell us to leave, was probably more painful for me than it was for my father. But he's a pretty easygoing guy, and he didn't get too upset by that.
Yeah. I'm just curious, your father, you said he's easygoing and, he's able to deal with all these things. What did he do for a living?
He was in real estate and insurance. Yeah. The Adler Projansky Real Estate and Insurance Company on TUI. Yeah.
Okay.
And
I mean, he must have really been so quick to be able to think on his feet, to be able to deal with this and survive. I mean, anyone who survived the Holocaust is such a unique type of person, not to say anything of anyone who didn't survive, but it's just, I mean, what do you think it took for him to be able to get through this? And, what special qualities do you think he has that helped him?
Well, he told me that, he credits his survival with the hope that he would be reunited with his family when it was all over. That's what kept him going. He was separated from he knew his mother and brother he would never see again, but his two sisters and his father, he had hoped that maybe he would see after the war. And that gave him the, internal strength to carry on. Of course, he found out later that he was the sole survivor. His father died in Dachau about 3 days before Dachau was liberated. His younger sister perished at Auschwitz, and his older sister perished at Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, it's a lot. I can understand why he didn't want to talk about it. It's just so painful. How did your family, like your siblings and your mom, cope with his silence? Did he ever speak to your mom about this?
I don't know. I don't know if they actually divorced about 25 years ago. So, but I don't recall them having any conversations. I do recall that most of my father's friends, when we were living in Skokie and Wilmette, were survivors, and they would all, they had their little group, and they would talk in Yiddish and Polish and sometimes Hungarian, and I never knew what they were talking about, but I'm sure they had a common bond.
Oh, for sure.
And that's what kept them together.
Towards the end of the film, you go on March of the Living, and your father's speaking to the teenagers who are on the trip and going through the camp. And you said actually now he's gone on it 5 times.
Yeah.
I mean, has that made him stronger? Does he feel like he's making a huge difference with these younger people?
Absolutely. I wholly believe that, the reason that he's so together right now at 92 and physically and mentally is his mission. I believe he believes it's his mission to educate children about what happened during the war, and that keeps him going. And I mean, this COVID thing is actually preventing him from doing what he wants to do. That's his main purpose in life right now. He had to cancel many speaking engagements. Of course, this time of year, there's a lot of speaking engagements being around Yom HaShoah. But without a doubt, this is what keeps him going.
Yeah. Well, why don't we talk about what's going on right now a little bit with COVID and the effect on survivors. And you talk about your father has speaking engagements, but it's incredibly isolating. I'm so thankful that we have this technology, but for a lot of people, it's hard to be able to use it, or they are shut into their home for a long time. And it's hard to get to spread the message. This is the best time to talk about the Shoah. So, how have you seen other people coping with this? And do they, do you talk to your father about the fear of leaving your home and getting sick from a disease as similar to leaving your home and being scared of the Nazis?
Well, yeah, he calls this what we're experiencing right now. He calls it the natural Holocaust. This is he won't go out of his house. He barely understands Instacart. I've actually had to send him toilet paper from California because he's unable to get it in Denver where he lives twice. And I'm happy to that seems to be the thing that people are having a hard time finding. But he does feel isolated. I taught him how to use Zoom, so we have family meetings so he can see his great grandchild and his children and his grandchildren, and he loves that part of it. But he has another mission, and he's being prevented from doing it.
Yeah. And are you working on projects right now that have been stalled?
Yeah, actually, through surviving Skokie, a local attorney and named John Pollock, I think and Cheryl Fisher, who's a realtor there. We went to Ukraine in September, and we started making a film which we're calling Beyond Babi Yar, which is a film designed to heighten awareness about the nearly 2 million Jews that were butchered by the Nazis and with some help from the local Ukrainians and buried in unmarked mass graves all throughout the country of Ukraine during the war. So that we went out there and we filmed some dedications of these sites, and I came back and I edited a fundraising trailer, but this has put that on the back burner for now.
Do people who finance movies, are they just putting a hold on everything right now?
Do most of my bread and butter comes from doing corporate video and commercials, and I haven't worked a day since March 8th. So yeah, it's definitely impacting our industry.
Yeah, that is. I feel like there's an opportunity for all these TV shows where people are, like Conan or or Jimmy Fallon, or all these places where there could be a better video quality. So maybe that's an opportunity to jump on.
Yeah, I'm doing everything I can to, to keep things rolling.
Absolutely.
Unsuccessful.
When you went to finance this movie, Surviving Skokie, did you find a lot of support? Were people very open to being a part of it?
It's kind of funny. The individual donors was the lion's share of our fundraising efforts. We did the essential Kickstarter type campaign, and then I got a small grant from the Claims Conference. But the larger Jewish organizations kind of, were like, another film about the Holocaust. And this is coming from large Jewish organizations that, I thought I might be able to convince to send a few dollars our way to help us make this film. But it was really a family foundation. A friend of mine has a family foundation, and they wrote probably 90% of the checks for the making of this film.
Were they based in Chicagoland area?
No, a friend of mine out here in San Francisco.
Yeah. Had they heard about Skokie before?
She had known about Skokie. She's Jewish, and I've done some corporate video work with her, and we became friendly, and I pitched her on it, and she went in, she was great.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important story to share. What's so interesting, though, is that Skokie is so known for this march that never actually happened.
Right.
Do you think that's an unfair portrayal of the town?
Well, it never happened, but there was a threat of it happening for almost 18 months. So, you know, when you expect something to happen, you get up in arms. You know, Aaron Elster put a gun in the back of his car and went to one of these potential rally sites. I mean, people got very upset. The fact that it didn't happen is a wonderful thing. I think what the main reason, and I believe Bob Candleman and Buzz Alpert, the JDL guys, you know, said it best, is, you know, they were afraid for their lives. You know, they had been beaten up in Berwyn and Cicero, and they saw the outrage in the media and international coverage and letters of support from all over the world for the survivor population in Skokie. And they said, well, okay, we won the Supreme Court case, but are we going to go? Maybe not.
Maybe let's not get killed.
Yeah, let's not get killed today.
It would have been an interesting thing to, not to say I would want it now, but like just to see how it would have happened in the age of social media.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, go ahead.
Charlottesville. I mean,
Yeah.
Charlottesville is a very good example of, you know, what happened there with the age of social media. And suddenly, you know, we became very aware of what was going on there.
Yeah. It's, is it shocking to you that there still are genocides that take place around the world?
It is shocking. You know, it breaks my heart that it continues, you know, that we haven't learned anything from an event that took place, you know, 75 years ago. And I don't know what that comment is to say about human nature and the human race, but it does continue, and it's really breaks my heart. I think everybody needs to see a film like Surviving Skokie to understand what you know, unbridled hatred can do to people.
Yeah. No, I think the media is important to be able to teach them the message of tolerance and, you know, understanding of each other, where we don't, you know, go into these things. I'm afraid with COVID that there's going to be a lot of blame from people around the world about the disease, but it's like the weather, you know, it just is. And we just need to be able to work together, I feel, to heal and protect ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of unity around the world as a result. You know, we're all coming together. Lady Gaga had her wonderful music fundraiser for WHO. And you know, we are seeing a lot of hands clasping, and I think it's wonderful. See how long it lasts.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I guess I hope it continues, and I hope we heal quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I assume your children have seen the movie, right? And how old are your grandchildren?
I have one grandson who's 2.5. He has
Okay.
not seen it yet.
No.
But yeah, both my children not only have seen it, but you know, my father would come visit us in California every Thanksgiving, and when he was in town, he would speak in their schools. There was a particular history teacher at my children's school that really liked him and liked his story, and always invited him to speak when he came. So they knew his story inside and out for many years, and then saw the film.
What'd they think of the film?
You know, they were proud. They were proud of him. They were proud of me. They thought it was a good film, a story that needed to be told, a Holocaust film that had a twist. You know, I mean, there's plenty of Holocaust films that, you know, focus primarily on you know, the horrific images that have been recovered, the bodies being bulldozed, the people being shot. You know, we wanted to tell the story another way. So it's a personal story that has a connection to an event that happened, you know, 40 years later in America. So it spans 2 continents and 75 years, and and we're glad. I'd love to see if anybody in our gallery has any questions as well.
Yeah, yeah. If anyone has questions, please submit them on the chat. Um, and some of the questions I've been asking have been through the chat, but one question
Oh,
I
okay.
want to ask to everybody, or to you, is where can people see the film if they haven't seen it yet? And then we'll put that on the chat as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, the film's available on Amazon Prime and Apple iTunes right now.
Okay.
It's also, I have DVDs that are available through my website, and the website address is survivingskokiemovie.org. And there's a place you can buy my father's book. My father wrote a book that came out in 2012. It's called Why, the letter Y, A Holocaust Narrative by Jack Adler. So that's available on Amazon as well, and through my website, and so is the DVD of the film.
Well, it's fantastic. Yeah, I think that people should watch this film. I think that a lot of these films are very important, and it's good to be able to share with everybody these things. And one question that's come through from the gallery here is, why did your father move to Denver?
Because my sister moved to Denver. He and my mother had already been divorced at that point, and he was retiring. And my sister's husband is a sportscaster and got a job in Denver, and she started having babies, and he wanted to be closer to a grandchild. And unfortunately, California was a little too expensive for him, at least the San Francisco area. It's a pretty pricey area where we live.
Yeah, I hear people are living on boats there.
Yeah, and on the streets too, plenty of those.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. One question I have with how things are going to be going for the next year is, do you think that your father would do Zoom calls with schools around the country to talk to students, maybe high schoolers, and answer questions?
He absolutely would. And I just need to get him, the last time I tried to get him on a Zoom call, it took 20 minutes while everybody else was waiting. He's not the most computer literate guy, but we eventually got it going. And so if I could help him and give him 30 minutes of advance time, we could probably get him in on a Zoom call, and he would love to do that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think it would be great. And I think it's important that we don't lose this time, although it is hard with the tech. And usually it's helpful when someone's there to get it going for someone who's unfamiliar with it. But unfortunately, we can't do that right now. And it's just such a good film to be able to learn about this story. And I just, as a personal reflection, I knew about it, but I didn't know as much as, even having been somebody who's so part of Skokie. And I'm so glad you made this. When you were making this, did you get any support from the village of Skokie with their archives or anything else in that nature?
Yeah, the village of Skokie did give us some of the early stills, and the when in the very beginning of the film where we established Skokie, and we see a period photo of the Skokie Swift, and some other iconic imagery of Skokie. We did get help from their archives.
Yeah, they've been great. I think that I really like Skokie. I feel like they really helped the community. I actually was an intern there many years ago, and I've interviewed the mayor. And I just think that they just do so much to really support, and what they did to support the community and fight up to the Supreme Court level during that story. I think it was key to this fight against Nazism.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to think back at that time, the mayor was not Jewish. The Mayor Smith was a Catholic man, and Skokie at that time, 50% of the population were Jews. It was, a very big Jewish voting bloc, but they loved each other, and Mayor Smith respected the survivors, and and Harvey Schwartz was the city attorney, and he fought legally, to put in injunctions against the Nazis from marching, and it went back and forth and back and forth. So yeah, it was a good time. There was a lot of support from the local non-Jewish religious communities. The survivors were well taken care of in Skokie at that time.
Yeah, and I think it's lasted that idea of tolerance, and that's why I think there's over 100 languages spoken in Skokie public schools now. So there's still a large Jewish community, but it is an incredibly diverse community,
Right.
and because we accept everybody who's come in. When somebody has a question here, did your father get recorded for the hologram exhibit at the Holocaust Museum?
No, no, and I wish that he was. He was recorded by the Spielberg Shoah project, the video
I was going to ask you.
testimony project, and I actually know the director of the Shoah Foundation, Stephen Smith. I went to Auschwitz with him and made a film with him to commemorate the 70th anniversary of Auschwitz. It's called One Day in Auschwitz, where we brought Kitty Hart Moxon back, and she was one of the first survivors. She lives in England now. She's still alive. She's 97, and she made one of the first return to Auschwitz films called Kitty Returns to Auschwitz in 1980 something. And he and Stephen Smith were friends, and while we were there, they were discussing the Holocaust, or the hologram project, which I thought was phenomenal. And I really would have my dad, but it's a grueling process. It's 8 hours a day for 5 days of just constant questioning to get every conceivable answer to every conceivable question. It takes a long time, and I don't think he could do that now.
Yeah, at 92, I'm sure it's pretty hard, but I appreciate everybody who did do it, and
Yeah,
look, he did this film, he's made a tremendous sacrifice to go back there and put himself through this emotional roller coaster, and taking you there, I think, was incredibly important. So I commend him unbelievably.
yeah. Well, thank you. I do too. Yeah, he's doing great work. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, it's a great film. I'm so glad we've got to ask, questions of you about it. Is there something you want to leave us with?
You touched on it before, the tolerance, and that's the ultimate message that I wanted to leave the viewer with, that, we have to be tolerant of each other. We don't have to love one another, but we have to tolerate each other if we're going to survive as a species. It's just so critical. And I hope the film does get people to think in that direction, and maybe share their thoughts with others, that, there's no room for hatred. We just have to be one big family. I know it sounds trite, but, I believe in it.
We're all cousins.
We are all cousins.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you to the audience for tuning in today.
Thank you.
We have more next week. Check the JCC's website. And, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and Hillary, for putting it together. And I really enjoyed being here. It gives me something different to do than dig holes for new plants in our garden and paint the house and all the other home projects that I'm doing during the time of COVID-19. So this is a great distraction, and I'm so glad to be part of it. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
And everyone stay well. Take care.
Okay, be well. Thank you.
Bye, Abba.